When a man has no one but God, he steps into a realm where earthly attachments lose their hold and eternity becomes tangible. This is not merely loneliness, it is sacred ground. It is the place where the soul uncovers its true dependence, not on the approval of others, not on material security, not on temporary comforts, but on the presence of the living God. Some of the greatest men who ever walked this earth were men who spent time in the wilderness of solitude. Abraham walked away from everything familiar to follow a voice he could not see. Joseph was betrayed, sold, imprisoned, and forgotten before his dream came to pass. Elijah stood alone against kings and prophets of false gods. They all walked through the fire of isolation, but not a single one walked alone, and neither will you. You are not abandoned. You are being refined. You are not forgotten. You are being prepared. God is doing a work in you that no one else can see yet. That's why you must not give up. Don't curse the silence. Don't flee from the stillness. Stay with it. Something holy is happening when the world leaves you behind, when friends fall away, when loved ones don't understand, and when you stand at the edge of yourself and say, God, I can't take one more step. That's when heaven answers with power. That's when strength rises, not your own strength, but His. That's when peace comes in the middle of the storm, not because the waves stop, but because you finally saw the one who walks on water. Faith is forged not in comfort, but in contradiction. When everything says you're alone, yet you choose to believe you're held. When everything says you're finished, yet you hear the still small voice say, I'm not done with you yet. That's faith. That's fire-tested belief, and that is unshakable. God has always been in the business of showing up when all other options are gone. He doesn't need favorable conditions. He doesn't require a crowd. He doesn't wait for perfect timing by human standards. He steps into the prison cell, into the lion's den, into the fiery furnace, not after the crisis, but right in the middle of it, and He does it again and again for those who call on His name. You may be feeling overlooked today. Maybe no one sees your pain. Maybe they see your strength, but not your struggle. They see the smile, but not the sleepless nights. And maybe, just maybe, you've started to believe the lie that you have to carry this all on your own. But I'm here to tell you, you don't. You were never meant to. There is one who sticks closer than a brother, one who will never leave you nor forsake you, one who is the same yesterday, today, and forever, one whose eyes are on the sparrow and whose arms are underneath you even now. He sees the hidden battles. He sees the broken places. He sees the tears that no one else notices, and He says, you are mine. You are not forgotten. You are not alone. There is a kind of prayer that comes only when a man is out of options. It's not polished, it's not pretty, it's raw, it's real, it's desperate. It's the cry that rises from the dust and ashes saying, God, if you don't show up, I won't make it. And that kind of prayer moves heaven. When you reach the end of yourself, you reach the beginning of grace. And grace is not some fragile idea. Grace is a force. It lifts you up when your knees give out. It carries you when your strength runs dry. It wraps you in mercy when you stumble again. Grace is the hand of God pulling you out of the pit, not because you earned it, but because He loves you. I don't know what valley you're walking through. I don't know what the silence feels like in your life, but I do know this. If you've got God, you have everything you need. When the world fades, when people walk away, when doors close, God remains. And not only does He remain, He restores. God doesn't just sit with you in your brokenness. He rebuilds you. He doesn't just comfort you in your sorrow. He gives you beauty for ashes. He gives you strength for your weakness. He turns mourning into dancing. He turns weeping into joy. There is a future for you. There is hope beyond the pain. There is life after the loss. But you won't find it chasing the approval of people or the pleasures of this world. You will find it on your knees alone, with the one who shaped you in the womb and knows the number of hairs on your head. Don't despise this season. Don't rush the process. Lean into it. Let it purify you. Let it simplify you. Let it draw you closer to the only one who can satisfy the deepest places of your heart. This world is full of noise, opinions, distractions, and lies. But when you are alone with God, that noise fades, and what's left is truth. What's left is love. What's left is power. That power will fill you. That love will change you. That truth will set you free. There will be a day when you look back on this season, not with bitterness, but with gratitude, and you'll say, it was in that lonely place that I learned to listen. It was in that dark valley that I found the light. It was when I had no one else that I realized God was all I ever needed. And when you rise from this place, you'll carry something unshakable. You'll have a testimony forged in fire. You'll speak with authority, not because you read it in a book, but because you lived it in your bones. You'll carry peace into chaotic rooms. You'll bring hope to broken people. And when they ask, how did you survive? You'll say, I had no one but God, and that was enough. You are not disqualified. You are not too far gone. You are not beyond repair. In fact, you are exactly where you need to be for a miracle to unfold. When a man has no one but God, he is ready to be used by God. He is no longer leaning on shallow support systems. He is no longer intoxicated by applause. He is no longer chasing what can never satisfy. He is standing on the rock, and that kind of man cannot be shaken. This is not the end of your story. This is the chapter that changes everything. Stay faithful, stay humble, stay available. God is not done. He is writing something beautiful, even if right now all you see are broken lines. Trust the author. He finishes what he starts. When a man finds himself in the depths of solitude, it is easy for him to feel as though he has been abandoned by the world. The silence of an empty room, the absence of voices, and the lack of human presence can be overwhelming. In those moments, loneliness can feel like a curse, a painful reminder of what has been lost or of relationships that have faded away. But what if this very solitude is not a curse at all? What if it is the sacred space where God works most powerfully in a man's life? The truth is, solitude is often where transformation takes place. It is where a man can hear the voice of God most clearly and where his soul can be shaped for something greater. It is in the quiet, in the moments of being alone, that a man can strip away the distractions of the world. The hustle and bustle of life often drown out the still, small voice of God. In the noise of daily living, we are bombarded with opinions, expectations, and endless demands. But when a man is alone, without the pressure of pleasing others or responding to the constant stream of noise, it becomes easier to listen, to reflect, and to be still in the presence of God. In solitude, a man is invited into a deeper relationship with his Creator. There is no one else to impress, no one else to answer to, just the unfiltered connection between the soul and the Almighty. This is the space where God can begin his work of personal transformation. The distractions that once clouded his mind fall away, and he begins to see clearly. Solitude allows a man to confront the deepest parts of his heart, the parts that are often hidden from the world and even from himself. It is in the silence that we can see our weaknesses, our fears, our doubts, and our insecurities. But this is not a cause for despair. It is an opportunity for growth. For it is in these moments that God can meet us where we are, not in spite of our weaknesses, but because of them. God doesn't call the perfect. He calls the broken, the weary, the ones who have nowhere else to turn. And in the quiet, he begins to mold us into who we were always meant to be. Moreover, solitude isn't just a place of self-reflection. It is also a place of revelation. It is in the stillness that we can hear God's voice more clearly than ever. His words can cut through the noise of our lives and pierce our hearts with truth, wisdom, and guidance. When the distractions are gone, God's voice becomes the loudest thing in our lives. It is in solitude that we can truly surrender our plans, ambitions, and desires to Him. We stop trying to control every aspect of our lives and instead open ourselves to His leading. In that moment of surrender, transformation begins. In solitude, we are not abandoned. We are being prepared. God uses this time to refine us, to teach us, and to strengthen us for the journey ahead. While it may feel uncomfortable, even painful, it is in these times of isolation that we become who we were always meant to be. God works through our solitude to draw us closer to Himself and to help us become more like Him. Solitude is not a place of emptiness, it is a place of fullness, a fullness that only God can provide. It is a place where the fullness of God's presence can saturate us, renew us, and transform us from the inside out. Throughout history, many of the most remarkable individuals were not propelled into greatness by fame, fortune, or applause, but by seasons of solitude and hardship. It is in the wilderness, far from the spotlight, that God often performs his most profound work in a person's life. When Moses fled to the wilderness, when David was tending sheep, when Jesus withdrew into the desert, they were not abandoned, they were being prepared. The wilderness is not the conclusion of the story. It is often the very place where God begins to shape us for the work ahead. By its nature, the wilderness is a place of isolation and difficulty. It strips away the comforts of the world, leaving a person with only what truly matters. In the wilderness, there are no distractions, no applause, and no external validation. Just a person and their Creator. It is in this quiet, demanding environment that God works in ways we don't always understand in the moment. A profound transformation happens in the wilderness, one that prepares a person not merely for success, but for a life of purpose. Consider Moses. Before he could lead a nation, he spent 40 years in the wilderness, a fugitive running from his past mistakes. Yet in the wilderness, he learned humility, patience, and dependence on God. He heard the voice of God from a burning bush, and in that instant he realized his life was part of something far greater than himself. Had he remained in Egypt surrounded by power and influence, he might never have learned the lessons the wilderness taught him. The wilderness was not a punishment for Moses, but the place where God prepared him for a divine purpose that would alter the course of history. David was also anointed to be king, but he didn't immediately ascend the throne. Instead, he spent years running from King Saul, hiding in caves and living as a fugitive. During these wilderness years, David grew in strength, character, and trust in God. He learned to lead not through military might, but through humility and reliance on the Lord. Many of the Psalms he wrote during this time are raw expressions of faith, emotion, and intimacy with God. Had David taken the throne without these formative years, he might not have been ready to govern with the wisdom and grace that defined his reign. The wilderness is more than just a physical place. It is often a spiritual condition many of us experience. There are seasons of difficulty, loss, or transition when it feels as if we are far from God's presence or his purpose for our lives. Yet these wilderness seasons are frequently the very places where God prepares us for something greater. They are not dead ends, they are launching pads for what lies ahead. Just as God called Moses and David out of the wilderness in his perfect timing, he will also bring us out of our wilderness seasons when the time is right. The preparation that occurs in the wilderness must never be underestimated. It is there that we learn to rely solely on God, where we are tested and refined, and where we discover strength we never knew we possessed. The wilderness season may be difficult, but it is precisely in those moments of testing and isolation that we are formed into the people God intends us to be to fulfill his purposes. In the wilderness, we learn to trust. We learn that God is faithful even when we cannot see the way forward. We learn that his provision is sufficient even when resources seem scarce. We learn to hear his voice clearly amid the quietness of the desert, away from the distractions of the world. In the wilderness, we discover a deeper intimacy with God, a relationship built on trust and dependence, not on the applause of crowds or the approval of others. The wilderness is not a place to flee from, but a place to embrace. It is where God shapes, refines, and prepares us for the future. So when you find yourself in a season of solitude, struggle, or confusion, remember this: you are not forgotten, you are being prepared. The wilderness may feel uncomfortable, but it is not the end. It is the place where God is readying you for something far beyond what you can imagine. In the depths of despair, when the weight of the world feels unbearable and your strength to continue wanes, it is in these moments of weakness that God's power is most clearly displayed. Many view weakness as something to hide or avoid, a mark of failure or inadequacy, but in God's eyes, weakness is not shameful. It is the very place where his strength can be fully revealed. When a man feels he cannot go any further, when his own power is stripped away, he encounters a strength beyond himself. These seasons confront us with our limitations, with the stark reality that there are circumstances beyond our control, people we cannot change, and outcomes we cannot dictate. It is in these moments of helplessness that God's strength shines brightest. His power, working through our weakness, is one of the most beautiful and transformative forces in existence. Paul, one of the most influential apostles of the early church, spoke profoundly about this truth when describing his own hardships. He prayed 3 times for God to remove a thorn in his flesh that caused him great distress. Yet God's response was not to take away the pain, but to say, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." 2 Corinthians 12:9. Paul's response to this divine revelation was remarkable. "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Paul understood that it was not through his own strength that God's glory was most fully revealed, but through his weaknesses. In that vulnerable place, Paul experienced the sufficiency of God's grace and the depth of his power. This concept runs counter to the world's definition of strength. Society teaches us to depend on our own abilities, to push through adversity with sheer willpower, to conquer challenges through personal determination and strength. But God calls us to think differently. He invites us to surrender our self-reliance and trust in His power. True strength is not about what we can accomplish on our own. It is about what God can accomplish through us when we admit our need for Him. When we are at our lowest, when we feel utterly powerless, we are often most receptive to God's work in our lives. At those moments, we stop relying on our own wisdom, resources, or cleverness and begin to lean entirely on Him. Our weakness creates space for God's power to manifest. His strength is not delivered as the world expects. It's not physical might or self-sufficiency. It is divine strength, gentle yet unshakable, giving us courage when we want to give up, wisdom when we are confused, and peace when overwhelmed. God's strength does not erase our weakness. It is perfected through it. It is as though God transforms our fragility into something powerful and beautiful. In moments of despair, when broken and weary, God meets us with the strength to rise again. His power sustains us when we cannot sustain ourselves, carries us when our legs falter, and lifts us when exhaustion overwhelms us. The beauty of this divine strength is its transformative nature. We emerge from trials and weakness stronger, not because of our own effort, but because we allowed God to work through us. When we acknowledge our dependence on Him, we open ourselves to His transforming power. We don't come out of weakness the same as before. We come out refined, shaped, and empowered by God. God's strength is not given in the absence of weakness, but amid it. When we are weak, we are most able to experience His strength in its purest form. When we feel empty, that is when He fills us with all we need. In this divine exchange, what once seemed like defeat, the trial, the struggle, the weakness, becomes the place where we encounter the fullness of God's power and grace. So if you find yourself in a season of weakness, do not despair or buy into the lie that you are insufficient or failing. In fact, it is precisely in that place that God is about to do His greatest work. His power is made perfect in your weakness. Trust Him in this season, and you will emerge stronger, more dependent on Him, and more aware of the power only He can provide. There are times in life when we cry out to God and feel as if our prayers go unanswered. In these silent seasons, it can be hard to see past the stillness and sense God's presence. It's easy to fall into the trap of thinking that God has abandoned us or that He is distant, uninvolved, or indifferent to our struggles. But the reality is that God's silence is not evidence of His absence. Often it is in these quiet moments that God is working more powerfully than we realize. We live in a culture that prizes instant answers and quick fixes. We are accustomed to immediate results in work, relationships, or even technology. But God's ways are not our ways, and His timing is not confined by the pressures of the world around us. Sometimes the silence we experience from God is not a withdrawal, but a moment of divine waiting, a space where God allows us to grow, to trust, and to prepare for what He is about to accomplish. Throughout Scripture, we observe many instances of God's silence during critical points in His people's journey. The Israelites waited in Egypt for hundreds of years, crying out for deliverance, yet God did not immediately respond. There were moments in the wilderness when they wondered if God had forgotten them as they endured hunger, thirst, and overwhelming fear. Still, God was with them all along, orchestrating their rescue in His perfect time. His silence was not abandonment, but a sign of preparation, shaping them for the promised land. Even Jesus, the Son of God, experienced the silence of His Father in the Garden of Gethsemane. As He prayed in anguish, Jesus cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" In His moment of deepest agony, it appeared as though God had turned His face away. Yet in that silence, God was not absent. He was fulfilling His ultimate plan of redemption through Jesus' suffering. God's silence on the cross did not signify abandonment, but the unfolding of his perfect will for salvation. God's silence reminds us that we are not in control. Human nature often drives us to demand immediate answers, quick fixes, and a clear path forward. However, God's silence teaches us patience, faith, and trust in his timing. It is in the waiting, in the moments when it feels like nothing is happening, that God is often doing his most significant work. He is preparing us, strengthening us, and aligning our hearts with his will. In the silence, God cultivates deeper faith and greater dependence on his plan, which is always far beyond anything we could have orchestrated ourselves. Silence is also a test of our trust. When God is silent, we face a choice. Will we continue to believe in his goodness even when we don't hear his voice? Will we remain faithful when it seems like he is distant? This is a crucial moment in our spiritual journey. God's silence invites us to trust not in what we see or hear, but in what we know of his character. We know he is good, faithful, and loves us. Even when we cannot sense his presence, we can rest assured that he is still with us, working behind the scenes to bring about his perfect plan. The delays and periods of silence in our lives are not signs of rejection or abandonment, but part of the divine process shaping us for the purposes God has in store. Though we may not understand the silence in the moment, we can trust that God's timing is always perfect. When he finally speaks, it will be at exactly the right moment, and his plan will unfold in ways beyond our imagination. So when you find yourself in a season of silence, do not be discouraged. Know that God is not absent. He is present, working invisibly to prepare you for the next step on your journey. His silence is not neglect, but a sign of perfect timing and loving care. Trust in his process and wait in faith, knowing his plan is always worth the wait. There comes a time in every person's life when we reach the end of ourselves. We find ourselves standing on the edge, exhausted, worn out, and feeling like we have nothing left to give. The struggles, disappointments, heartaches, and failures accumulate until we can no longer carry the weight alone. In these moments, we may feel lost, as though we have reached the limits of our strength and endurance. But it is precisely in these moments of complete surrender, when we come to the end of our own ability, that we encounter God's grace. God's grace is not fragile. It is not a mere consolation or passing comfort. His grace is powerful, unshakable, and unfathomably deep. It is in our moments of weakness, when we feel broken and vulnerable, that his grace lifts us up. God's grace doesn't just soothe our pain, it strengthens us. It gives us the power to rise again when we are too tired to stand, to move forward when we are certain we cannot take another step, and to continue when it feels like we have reached our limit. The Apostle Paul, one of the most significant figures in early Christianity, understood the sufficiency of God's grace better than most. Paul faced countless trials, persecutions, and hardships. In 2 Corinthians 12:9, he speaks about a personal struggle, a thorn in the flesh that tormented him. He prayed earnestly 3 times, asking God to remove this burden. Yet instead of taking the pain away, God responded, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." Paul's reaction to this revelation was profound. "Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Paul realized that God's grace was not only enough to sustain him through his trials, but was the very source that empowered him to persevere. It was in his weakness that God's strength shone brightest. Grace became Paul's strength and endurance, even in his greatest struggles. This is the nature of God's grace, not a temporary fix or fleeting comfort, but a deep and unshakable foundation. When we feel like we have nothing left, when we feel like we are about to collapse under life's burdens, God's grace steps in to hold us up. It becomes the support we lean on when our own strength fails. In our most vulnerable moments, God's grace reaches out, reminding us we don't have to bear the weight alone. God's grace is not earned or deserved, it is freely given. There is nothing we can do to make ourselves worthy, yet in our most desperate moments, it is abundantly offered. It is through this grace that we find strength to move forward, to endure adversity, and to press on when the road seems impossible. God's grace meets us exactly where we are and lifts us to where He wants us to be. In our weakness, we come to truly understand the depth of God's grace. When we reach the end of ourselves, we realize we cannot do it alone. We cannot control everything, fix every problem, or carry every burden. But in that surrender, admitting we are not enough, God's grace flows in and empowers us. We are not meant to rely on our own strength, but on the strength God provides. When we lean on His grace, we discover it is more than enough to carry us through. God's grace doesn't just carry us, it transforms us. It is not only a source of strength, but also of healing. It mends the broken places in our hearts, restores what was lost, and renews our spirits. In grace, we find courage to forgive, resilience to hope, and peace that surpasses understanding. There may be times when we feel completely depleted, as if we have nothing left to give. Yet even in those moments, God's grace is never exhausted. It is infinite, sufficient for every trial, every challenge, every heartbreak. When we come to the end of ourselves, only then can we fully experience the power and sufficiency of God's grace. In that grace, we find the strength to rise again, to press forward, and to continue walking in the purpose God has for our lives. So, when you feel at your weakest, when you feel like you can't go on any longer, remember this: God's grace is enough. It is powerful, sustaining, and will never run dry. You are never alone, and His grace is always sufficient to carry you through. In the darkest seasons of life, when isolation and struggle weigh heavily on our hearts, it is easy to feel lost or forgotten. The path ahead may seem unclear, and the burdens we carry may feel impossible to bear. But in these moments of uncertainty, faith and hope become our anchors. They keep us grounded and moving forward, even when everything around us seems to fall apart. Faith and hope in God are not fleeting emotions. They are lifelines that sustain us through the hardest seasons. They remind us that God's plan is always at work, even when we can't see it, and that He is preparing us for something greater. Faith is the foundation upon which we build our trust in God. It is the belief that, even when circumstances look bleak, God remains good, and His promises are true. Faith doesn't require us to have all the answers or to see the whole picture. Often it means stepping forward in trust, even when we have no idea what lies ahead. Faith is the decision to cling to God's character when clear direction is absent. It is the confidence that though storms rage, God remains in control and His purposes for our lives are unshaken. Hope is the fruit of that faith. Hope is what sustains us when all we have is a glimpse of God's promises, a faint whisper of the good He has prepared for us. It is the assurance that no matter how difficult the journey may be, we are never alone. Hope gives us the strength to endure, to keep pressing forward, and to hold tightly to the belief that our current circumstances do not determine our future. Hope tells us there is something greater ahead, that God's ultimate plan for our lives far surpasses any moment of suffering or trial. The Bible reminds us of the power of faith and hope in Romans 8:24-25. For in this hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what he sees? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience. This passage beautifully captures the essence of having faith and hope in God. We don't always see the full picture, yet we trust in His promise that He is working behind the scenes. It is this hope that guides us through the difficult seasons of our lives, knowing God has a plan, even if we don't fully understand it yet. When we place our faith in God and cling to hope, we are not only sustained through hard times, but also being prepared for the greater purpose He has for us. Struggles and challenges are not random. They are the refining fire that shapes us into the people God needs us to become for the next phase of our journey. The trials we face serve a purpose even when we cannot immediately perceive it. They prepare us to rise stronger, more equipped, and ready to fulfill the mission God has set before us. Consider the story of Joseph. His life was filled with betrayal, abandonment, and hardship, sold into slavery by his own brothers, unfairly imprisoned, and left alone in dark, lonely moments. Joseph had every reason to lose hope. Yet through it all, Joseph never abandoned his faith in God. He trusted that God had a purpose for his life, even when everything seemed to be falling apart. Ultimately, Joseph rose to a place of great authority where he saved many lives during a severe famine. His faith and hope in God, even amid suffering, not only sustained him but prepared him to fulfill his divine calling. Similarly, the Apostle Paul, who endured persecution, imprisonment, and relentless trials, continued to press on in faith, always hopeful in God's promises. Despite his suffering, he understood the purpose behind the trials. In Romans 5:3-4, Paul writes, "Not only that, but we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope." This passage powerfully reminds us that every trial we face is an opportunity for growth. Our faith and hope are refined through adversity, making us more resilient, compassionate, and capable of fulfilling God's purpose for our lives. When we hold tightly to faith and hope, we are being equipped for the future. The trials we experience today may feel like setbacks, but in reality, they are the very experiences shaping us for the greater purpose God has designed. Our struggles do not define us, they shape us. They teach us perseverance, humility, and trust. They refine our character and increase our capacity to love and serve others. Through it all, we can rest in the knowledge that God is using every moment, every hardship, trial, and joy to prepare us for the unique calling He has placed on our lives. Faith and hope are the tools that guide us through the journey, even when the path seems unclear. They remind us that God is with us, working all things together for our good, and that His timing is always perfect. We may not always understand why we face certain struggles, but we can trust that God is leading us towards something greater. So in those moments when you feel isolated, when the weight of the world seems too heavy to bear, hold on to faith and hope. Trust that God is at work behind the scenes, even when you cannot see it. Keep moving forward, knowing that He is preparing you for a greater purpose, a purpose that will be revealed in His perfect timing. When the moment comes for you to rise again, you will discover that you are stronger, wiser, and more prepared to fulfill the calling God has placed on your life.